Well, hello there, everybody. It's Grandpa Scott, and I'm back today with another great adventure and a very cool story to read to you. Today, we're going to read the story of Walt Disney's Mary Poppins. This is going to be a special day, and let's jump right into the book, shall we? So, Walt Disney's Mary Poppins. It was morning on Cherry Tree Lane. Admiral Boom had just shot off his morning cannon to give the day a proper start. Miss Lark, in the biggest house on Lane, had sent her dog Andrew out for a morning stroll. But in the nursery at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane, Jane and Michael Banks were still in bed. "Up, up," said Mary Poppins, their nanny, pulling back the blankets with a firm hand. "We'll have no lounging about on a supercalifragilistic day." "Supercalo what, Mary Poppins?" asked Michael. "Close your mouth, Michael. We are not codfish. Supercalifragilistic, of course. If you can't think of a word that says just what you want to say, try supercalifragilistic. And that It just describes today." That got Jane and Michael up and dressed, and breakfast in record time. "Out to the park we go," said Mary Poppins, hurrying them along into their hats and coats. "Spit spot, this way." "Supercalifragilistic," sang Jane and Michael as they marched along the lane. They almost bumped into Mary Poppins when she stopped to speak to Andrew, Miss Lark's little dog. "Yip, yip, yip," said Andrew. "Slower, please," said Mary Poppins. "I can't understand a word you say." "Yip, yip, yip," said Andrew. "Again," said Mary Poppins. "Yep, yep," said Andrew. "Yes, of course," said Mary Poppins. "I'll go straight away, and thank you very much." "Yep," said Andrew. Then, taking Jane and Michael by the hand, Mary Poppins started off the way Andrew had come. "What did he say?" asked Jane. "He said, 'You're welcome,'" said Mary Poppins. "But what else did he say?" Jane insisted. "I don't think he said anything at all," said Michael crossly. "And I thought we were going for a walk in the park." "There's been a change of plans," said Mary Poppins. "Come along, please, and don't straggle." She led them across in a brisk pace down the narrow and twisting streets they had never seen before, until at the door of a small house she stopped. Rap, rap, went the Patriot's head handle of Mary Poppins' umbrella. The door opened by Mary's friend Bert. "How is he?" Mary Poppins asked. Bert shook his head. "Never seen him smile like this," he said, "and that's the truth." Bert opened the door wide, and Mary Poppins pushed Jane and Michael along in front of her. They found themselves in a large, cheerful room in the center of the table set for tea. Sounds like they're going to have a snack. "Bless, bless my soul," gurgled a rich voice with chuckles. "Is that Mary Poppins? I'm delighted to see you, my dear." Jane and Michael looked about. They could see no one in the room until Mary Poppins spoke. "Uncle Albert, you promised not to go floating around again," she said. And she seemed to be speaking to the ceiling. Jane and Michael looked up, and there in the air sat Mary Poppins' Uncle Albert, chuckling merrily. I know, my dear," said Uncle Albert, wiping his merry eye. "I tried, really, I did. But I do so enjoy laughing, you know." Here are the chuckles bubbling up so that he bobbed against the ceiling. "And at that moment I started hee-heeing up with me." To the children he whispered, "It's laughing that does it, you know." Jane and Michael were trying hard to be polite. They kept their faces straight. But first the laughter sparkled out of their eyes, then it bubbled up through their throats, and then they began to chuckle What do you think's going to happen? That's right. By this time, Bert was rolling about, shaking with laughter. As they watched, he rose into the air, and soon he was bobbling beside Uncle Albert. Michael's chuckle grew to a laugh, and so did Jane's. Soon they were simply filled with laughter. It bubbled out, but still they felt lighter and lighter until their feet left the floor, and they floated until their heads bumped the ceiling. Oh, that's amazing! How nice, said Uncle Albert. I was hoping you'd turn up. Do you make yourselves comfortable, my dears? I must say you're a sight, the lot of you, said Mary Poppins, folding her arms the way that Jane and Michael knew meant she disapproved. Mary Poppins wasn't so happy. They were all up floating on the ceiling because they were laughing, but Mary Poppins wasn't. You know, speaking of sights, said Bert, that reminds me of my brother, who has nice cushy job in the watch factory. Is that so? Said Uncle Albert. What does he do? You know what he does, gasped Bert, who was laughing so hard he could scarcely speak. He stands around the watch factory all day and makes faces. At that, the four of them roared with laughter. They turned somersaults in the air. That looks amazingly fun, doesn't it? I found a horseshoe today, said Bert, holding his sides. You know what that means? I certainly do, said Uncle Albert. It means that some poor horse is walking around in his stocking feet. Again the room rocked with laughter. Only Mary Poppins looked stern. That's most disgraceful I've ever seen, she snapped. Or my name isn't Mary Poppins. Speaking of names, said Bert, I know a man with a wooden leg named Smith. Really? chortled Uncle Albert. What's the name of the other leg? More gasps of laughter. Now then, Jane, Michael, it's time for tea, said Mary Poppins. From below. I will not have my schedule disrupted. Oh, please stay, begged Uncle Albert. He waved at the table on the floor. I have splendid tea waiting for us. If you could manage to get the table to... With a rattle and a bump, the table began to jerk. Then it rose up into the air. Cups, cakes, teapot, and all floating in the air. Is that crazy? Oh, splendid, splendid. Thank you, my dear, said Uncle Albert. Then to Michael and Jane, keep your feet back, my dears. Watch the cups and mind the jam. Next thing, I suppose you'll be wanting to pour, said Mary Poppins with a sigh. And up she floated, neat as you please, without so much as a smile. The others still laughed and bobbed about as Mary poured and passed the tea with milk for Michael and Jane. Thank you, my dear, said Uncle Albert. I'm having such a good time. I wish I could stay up here with me always. Well, jolly have to, Michael grinned. There's no way to get down. Well, to be honest, said Uncle Albert, there is a way. Just think of something sad and down you go. But who would think of anything sad? They chuckled at the very idea and kept floating around. Time to go home, said Mary Poppins with a crisp voice and a firm cut through her laughter. Then suddenly, at that sad thought, came Jane and Michael and Uncle Albert and Bert. Bump, 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 bump. On the floor they went. Oh, there was a sad thought. Dropped them from the ceiling. Goodbye, said Michael. We'll be back soon. And thank you, said Jane soberly. We've had a lovely time. Oh, dear, Uncle Albert was sobbing as he waved goodbye. It makes me so sad to see them leave. Back home, Jane and Michael tried to tell their father about their adventure. We floated in the air and had tea on the ceiling, Jane began. And there was a man with a wooden leg named Smith. Michael broke in. Poppins, cried Mr. Banks. What's the meaning of this? Children will be children, sniffed Mary Poppins. And these two are up past their bedtime. Spit, spot! And she marched them off to the nursery, muttering, the very idea. Michael and Jane just stood and looked at each other. Anyway, said Jane, kicking off a slipper, it was a supercalifragilistic day. Was that a great story? Michael and Jane, they laughed so much it was the secret to get them to float to the ceiling. And they had tea with Albert. It was an amazing adventure. Mary Poppins, that is a great story, don't you think? We like to have fun, and sometimes it's a little silly, but that's okay. We were made to enjoy stories and jokes and laughter, and we need a little more laughter in our lives these days. So, even though the story's done, the adventure isn't over, because now's the time to go outside and have some fun, because this Walt Disney Mary Poppins story, well, it's all done.